It's almost about that time. Right about now.
Right about now. Funk, bunk, 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 soul brother.
Joyce Maynard, welcome to the Right About Now podcast.
I'm thrilled to be with you talking about whatever.
I mean, how do you even start with somebody like you've had like 9 lives? I don't even know. Like when I was just doing my research on you, I'm like, I don't even.
Let's not put that in the past
4
tense,
hours.
Jonathan. I'm still having them. Yeah,
You're on your 10th now.
Yeah,
Yes.
at least.
Well, it's a wonderful life.
I have been publishing books, which is that's not the same as how long I've been writing, but I've been publishing books for 51 years. I can never lie about my age. But yeah, I've been around a long time.
You've been around a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And you've had, I find you quite a brave person because you were canceled before canceling was a thing.
Mm-hmm.
You were a MeToo survivor before MeToo became a thing. You're kind of like an early adopter of all these like zeitgeist. You're 30 years.
It's not a club you necessarily want to be part of, but yeah, I was so naive. I didn't even know it was going to be a thing that would be a problem.
Right.
I didn't know cancellation.
Well, because it maybe was. Yeah. Well, cancellation wasn't even. I mean, we didn't call it that back then. But and I promise I won't dwell on this part of your life too much because I want to get into more current things, but I think it is important for readers to get a context here if they're not as familiar with you.
It's okay. I'm used to it. I don't start like, twitching and drooling when I talk about it. It's just that, there are many other.
I just don't want it to define you because you've had such incredible
and for
life,
some people, it still does. So I'll just say it really quickly and get it over with.
So we'll say, okay, so my question is how that
I don't even have to say, well, get it over with. It is important. I think it's historically important to say this. So I will say this, and I have no shame around it or, I'll just say it. So I started writing when I was very, very young and publishing my work, when I was like 13. And I was very ambitious, not so much to like get famous and make a lot of money, but actually to see the world, to get to New York City, to see, I was a small town girl from New Hampshire.
You're in New Hampshire, yeah.
Yeah. And so in my freshman year of college, and it was Yale, it was 1971.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
I wrote a letter to the editor-in-chief of the New York Times and said, I'd like to write for you. I was a girl that was too shy to like call up a boy, but I felt very confident of my writing. And I said, I'd like to write for you. And interestingly, he wrote back and he said, he gave me an assignment to write about the only subject I was qualified to write about at the time, which was me. So I wrote this article called long essay called, it was about my growing up. They named it. I completely, the irony of the title escaped me, but it was called An 18-Year-Old Looks Back on Life. Right. They sent a photographer to take my picture in my blue jeans in the Yale Library. And in April of 1972, a date I remember well, there I was on the cover of the New York Times Magazine in full color in my blue jeans with this article. And I should say it's a little different from like being in the New York Times Magazine now when there's so much media. There were like 4 things and that was one of them. There were 3 TV channels, So my life changed. I got hundreds and hundreds of letters, offers, go on TV, go on radio, sign book contracts, audition for The Exorcist, didn't get the part, which probably was just as well. And then among those was a letter, unlike all the others, that kind of moved me long before I got to the signature just by what it said and the voice in that letter. This is like a person who got me as nobody did. But the signature was J.D. Salinger. I embarked on a correspondence with him. I was a very young 18-year-old, completely inexperienced in the world. I thought I had my dear friend who just knew me like nobody else did. I was basically like getting letters from Holden Caulfield every day to me at Yale, telling me I was the most brilliant writer, the most wonderful girl. And this was my friend and mentor and spiritual guide. And of course, I went to see him when school got out and I kind of didn't leave. I quit the world and gave up my full scholarship at Yale, gave up a really good job that I had got for the summer at the New York Times, and believed I would be with him forever. And almost from the minute that I moved in, it was a big problem. And I tried desperately to be who he needed me to be. But, first
Who
day
did he need you to be?
well,
At that time?
he said the first day I moved in, when I took out my record albums, he said, "You're acting like a teenager," which I was.
Right.
Um,
And by the way, didn't he have teenagers at this time?
he did.
Like he
He
had,
did.
yeah.
Um, and it was with him. It was during that year with him, when I lived with him, in great secrecy. Nobody was supposed to know I was there. I wasn't allowed to answer the phone. That I wrote my first book, a memoir, ostensibly a memoir, although in the 160 pages of that memoir, you will not see any mention of the fact that I, the sort of youth spokesperson of America, 1972, had dropped out of her Ivy League college to live with J.D. Salinger. I didn't say that because I knew that would displease him. And 3 weeks before the book came out, this is the short version.
Yeah, no, there's a whole book on this, by the way, that you should read.
3 weeks before the book came out, on a trip to Florida with his children, he put two $50 bills in my hand and said, "Go back to the house, move your things out. I don't want to ever see you again." And as beautiful and loving as his first words were to me, those words were the most crushing and devastating. I was not a person of value. And being 18 years old, I was 19 by that time, I took it in. That was who I was, because the person I most respected said it. And I kept that secret for 25 years. I did carry on with my life. I didn't go back to college. I did not go to New York City, my big dream. I went to a little farm in New Hampshire, eventually married an age-appropriate man, divorced an age-appropriate man, had 3 children in the interim. And when my daughter, my oldest child, turned 18, and I was asked about him, every week, because people knew that I had lived with him. When my daughter turned age 18, I had a kind of revisiting of that experience. I had always felt it was my obligation to protect the great man. So much more important than I. I held on to that view that many people still hold on to, actually, even now. Great man, great books, you don't say certain things.
Yeah, right.
But then when I thought about my daughter at 18, my allegiance shifted to the girl, not me, but her. And I gave myself permission to tell the story that had been the forbidden story. And I wrote a book that was a real memoir that told that story, some people will call it the book about Salinger. It's not a book about Salinger. It's a book about me, but
Your experience with Salinger, yeah.
he and other things. And that book was called At Home in the World, and it came out in the fall of 1998, when I was by this time in my 40s. And I was, if you were around, which you probably were not,
I was.
Barely, but in that,
I'm 56. I was around.
Okay, so
I remember this.
It was a condemned book. Maureen Dowd in the New York Times called me a predator.
She said
Time
you were.
magazine
Yeah,
wrote,
I saw that.
now that Joyce, the one good thing about At Home in the World is now that Joyce Maynard has told the one story of value she has to tell, we'll never have to hear from her again. Wrong.
No.
And
So this is the cancellation I was talking about.
this was the cancellation. And I, if there was ever a moment for me to jump off the Golden Gate Bridge, that would have been it, but I didn't. I carried on, and I wrote many books since. I've written many books since then. One other memoir, nothing to do with Salinger, about finding and losing my very good second husband, and 12 novels, of which How the Light Gets In is the most recent.
First of all, you've covered so many interesting things there, and what a
I can talk.
That was
fast.
the abbreviated version of like an unbelievable story.
recommend
Like,
it.
by the way, when I was 18, I ran off with one of the most famous American novels.
I don't, I'm
but-
very proud of that book, At Home in the World. And it's still, I still get letters from people who find it in unexpected ways. It's not on the shelves of very many bookstores. It's not on the, it sort of got lost. And I don't have a favorite book of mine, but that's an important book for me to have written. And I feel a need to tell that story. I think it's an important story for young people to hear and to know. As recently as 1998, women were being told they were not, it was not okay to tell their story if their story concerned a more important man.
At that time, was a relationship with a 53-year-old, an 18-year-old, that was still considered inappropriate, right? I mean, and now that would be,
No.
oh,
Oh,
really?
no. Frank Sinatra was with Mia Farrow, and that was very
Yeah.
romantic. Pierre Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, was with a very young woman in her 20s. My Yale roommate during my very brief time at Yale moved in with her TA, her freshman advisor. No, that was kind of romantic and cool, and the things that professors would now be fired for 10 times over were accepted.
And I'm thinking of Woody Allen in Manhattan, where he had that was like it seems
Yes,
insane now.
it was in
Yeah.
plain sight. He was saying it, and
Yeah.
nobody flinched.
Nobody flinched. What changed, do you think?
Oh, well, some very brave women. Some very brave women.
Yeah. Saying this is not appropriate. You were
Mhm.
you to flip it and say that you were the predator. Why do you think? But this. What was interesting is then in '98 when you came out with this book. And by the way, it's very interesting to watch you do an interview with Charlie Rose, which I did watch last night.
Mm.
Considering what
After
ended
which
up
he
happening.
kissed me. After which he
Did he?
kissed
So there
me.
we
I was
go.
younger then.
You look like Meg
And he
Ryan.
was
Then
still
it's a
employed.
good interview. Yeah, it's a good interview, and you look. But it was it just to watch him and my God, that was strange and surreal. But even in '98, when look, I can remember '98. And for Maureen Dow to kind of what people would think a strong feminist woman to compare you to Monica Lewinsky, who now, by the way, has come out as a hero, right? What was that all about? Was that just protecting? It's kind of like what happened, I guess, when people started coming down on Woody Allen, where it was like all of a sudden all these people came out of the woodwork to sort of protect Woody Allen, although he didn't survive it really. But what happened? Why did the culture turn against
I'm
you?
not very good at justifying behavior that I don't endorse.
Yeah.
I don't know what was up with those people. I was I don't know. I'm 70 years old now, and I'm still kind of innocent in certain ways. I don't get it, really. I don't get it. I thought if you write a really good book, if you tell the truth, if you do your work, and I did write a really good book. Nobody said in all the hundreds of things that were written about that book, nobody said she lied, just she shouldn't have spoken.
Do you think you can?
We are going to get to my novel, right?
I promise. We're gonna get to your novel. Just
It's
one
okay.
other thing.
I'm
One
having
other
a
thing I
good
want to
time.
ask.
It's okay.
Okay, you're sweet. Thank you for indulging me just in this one moment. And I'm not gonna. The one thing, because my daughter and I had this my daughter is 14. I have an 18-year-old son too, so the thinking about this it's resonating with me. But my 14-year-old daughter was asking me the other day about the whole idea: can you separate the artist from the art?
Oh.
And look, I, like many people, was very inspired by J.D. Salinger when I was young. He was one of the first novel. I mean, Catch on the Rye was one of the first novels I ever read where I was like, wow, I want to be a writer. Like, that's cool. But then I hear your story and in other people's accounts of him, and it sounds, I'm not going to judge, whatever. I never met him, but not the greatest. But can you separate the art from the artist?
I can.
Okay.
And I would say to your daughter, yeah, I don't not look at Picasso. Don't not look at.
Not listen to Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I can't do that. I believe in making art, and I believe in the fact that, but I believe in knowing as we do that the artists are not gods. They are people who make art. I would never suggest that somebody not read those books of his, but read them knowing he's a writer, not a spiritual god.
Right. You decide to start writing fiction later in your career, right?
Not that much later. I actually wrote my first novel, Baby Love, when I was 26.
Oh, okay, so not that much later.
But
you didn't use your name.
I spent years. I hadn't yet written At Home in the World, but if you read Baby Love, there's a little bit of that story tucked away in it. I kept on backing up to it in different ways. Baby Love is I actually love Baby Love. But it's a strange, dark novel that has a character, a woman who was cast out by a much older man who she worshipped. But it's not about that. I just kind of tucked it in the side. I didn't know how to talk about that. And I didn't talk about it for many, many years. And it's one of the reasons now why I do one of the things I do. Mostly I write books. That's pretty much what I have done all my life. But I also, a few times a year, I spend a week teaching memoir, only memoir, not fiction, to women.
In Guatemala, right?
In Guatemala. And they're not necessarily women who call themselves writers. And I do that to honor the importance of women's stories and to support women and to say, nobody should have to be given permission to tell her own story. But, since some people have been led to believe that they don't have that permission, I stand up and say, yes, let's work on telling it so well that it will be heard.
I am the idea that you have this retreat in Guatemala talking about memoirs is so appealing to me. And then I found out that it's only for women. I was like, darn it. Well, it's
no.
wonderful
There
for the
are
women.
ones for men too. And also,
there are?
In between retreats, I run a hotel. It's a hotel. It's a fabulous
Where is it?
hotel. It's called Casa Paloma. And it's like the best place to stay ever.
Is it also in Guatemala?
It is. It's the same place.
I am so all over this.
Yeah.
I would love to study. We're going to get into your book.
So many people said what you did. I want to go, but the retreats are for women, the writing retreats.
I get it.
People wrote and said, I really want to go, but I'm not a writer. I'm not a woman. So I have something called Life by the Lake that I also host at my same place. And we visit shamans and we hike up volcanoes and we, swim and eat fabulous food cooked by Rosa. And now I'm having a Spanish intensive where people will, be immersed in Spanish. Or you can just go and have a honeymoon or a family reunion or something there. So yeah, Casa Paloma.
And shamans.
I don't just write books.
Ayahuasca. Yeah, you do a lot of things. Does the ayahuasca, does that involve the shaman?
Ayahuasca, you shouldn't dip in lightly. Ayahuasca is pretty serious business, but we have a cacao ceremony and we have a
cacao I can handle. That's more my speed.
Yeah.
All right. So I want to get into your book, How the Light Gets In, which is really a sequel to the first book about this family. Why family? What is it about family, writing a family saga that appealed to you so much?
Whether a writer is writing memoir or supposedly fiction, and this is fiction, it's not thinly veiled memoir, what a writer's obsessions are, after you've read a few of their books, and mine are pretty clear. I'm obsessed with family. Big surprise, mine was problematic. My family of origin was problematic. And I completely out of step with the women of my generation. I couldn't wait to have babies and be part of a happy
Tell me a little bit, let's step back. How was your family of origin problematic?
Oh, my parents were brilliant, inspiring people who didn't really, hadn't got the rule book of raising children. My mother sure knew how to teach me how to write. Both my sister and I are writers, but my father was an alcoholic. I adored my father, but there wasn't a day in my life when I didn't know it was for me to take care of him, not he, I, he, me. So I just wanted to be part of a happy family. The career part, the writing part came seemingly easy. I'd done it all my life, but the being part of a happy family thing, complicated. So
how did your mom encourage writing? Was it like
I grew up in a
give you great books?
I grew up in a
really?
boot camp of writing. From the age of 3. Before I could write, I gave dictation. She took it down. She took my words seriously and she edited me. And that whole thing about writing a letter to the New York Times was for her.
So she was
my mother was a brilliant
she was
woman
your audience.
who should have had a career, but she was a wife and mother of the 50s. She had a PhD from Harvard and couldn't get a job, Radcliffe. And so her job was making sure that my sister and I had a different life from hers. And we did. But it was stressful. I was always writing. You don't want to have me on your basketball team. We weren't playing sports, we weren't going off and, going bowling or, miniature golf. That was my dream, to go play miniature golf or go bowling. We didn't do those sort of regular things. We wrote.
So you would just sit around the table and, okay,
And
what did you write about?
Uh,
Whatever.
I won a prize for writing when I was, I think, 13, about going to a Janis Joplin concert. I mean, so many
Right.
things, so many
Just right.
hundreds.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. My father was a musician, so we grew up listening to a lot of music. So I guess it's sort of a similar thing for you,
Yeah.
where it's just like, it's unusual. I mean,
Yeah.
we listen to music in the sense that, like, we really listen to music.
And do
like,
you
talk
make
about
yeah?
music.
And do you make music yourself?
No, it skipped a generation. I'm a writer. I mean, I do. I'm a DJ. You can see the equipment behind me, and I produce and stuff like
One
that.
of my sons
But
is a DJ.
my son is a serious musician. He's going to music school in London next year.
Oh,
For
wait a
his
second. Oh,
college.
really? Whoa. Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's like a real. So it's funny that it skipped a generation.
And what kind of DJ are you? What music do you play?
I do a lot of old school hip hop from the 90s, and
Okay.
also a lot of dance music. And I'm the guy you bring out if you want to hear the classics from the 90s and the 80s.
Okay. Oh, I like
That's my
that.
generation.
Yeah.
And I want to talk to you about this. I don't want to jump ahead too much, but you do have a playlist that goes with How the Light Gets In, right?
I'm making a Spotify playlist. One time back in the 90s, I actually created a CD soundtrack for a novel.
Oh, wow.
And I had Townes Van Zandt record a song just for me, for my soundtrack.
Oh, wow.
I went to Nashville and had that done. So I'm a kind of DJ of, the music for my characters. Actually, my son, who lives in LA, is a DJ. And
Is he?
Yeah.
How old is he?
42.
That's interesting.
He's DJ Captain Planet.
Okay, I'm going to have to ask my son about DJ, and I'm going to have to investigate DJ Captain Planet.
So anyway, I could not imagine playing music while I write, but I play music before I write to get myself in the mood, and I create playlists for every one of my characters, and I think about the music they would listen to. As you know, if you've read How the Light Gets In, and incidentally, it's okay if you haven't. I know what it's like.
I've read half of it. Here it is. It's in my possession.
But you know that the book is full of music, and my books are always full of music, and it's one way to know a person, to know what they're listening to, and they don't just listen to the music. I mean, my main character has an amazingly similar set of musical tastes to my own.
So tell me, so let's
I'm all
you
over
asked me
that,
what I like.
actually, but
are you all over?
If you read every one of my books, you would know that, I mean, Dolly Parton is in every single book I've ever published. Joni Mitchell is in every, Johnny Cash, George Jones.
Singer-songwriters. You love singer-songwriters.
Americana, but also old rock and roll, old R&B, new rock and roll. I'm not one of those people that thinks that the only music is the music from her youth. I'm always interested in new music and Latin music, because I spend a lot of time in Latin places, African music. So
Very
my son
eclectic.
has introduced me to a lot of West African music and
Cool.
And Latin music, Cuban music. So yeah, I'm across the map. But How the Light Gets In, which of course is a title that comes from a Leonard Cohen song, Anthem. The first line of which is, "There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." And that is, it's not just a coincidence that I chose that line. It's really about the recognizing, after many decades of struggle and trying to make life perfect or match our dreams of what it's supposed to be, the happy family, that there is beauty in imperfection, and beauty in what is broken, and beauty in messiness. And my character, in the first book, we tracked her from the 70s through 2009. In the second book, we carry on with her. She happens to be exactly the same age that I am. And so we see her through many different ages and different kinds of music that she listens to, different things going on in the world. I always include the backdrop of what's going on in the world, not for some sort of political message, but because that is a part of our lives. So I don't know how you write a novel set in the United States of America that some of which takes place in 2016, 2017, 2018, and not have the Trump years. So there's
Mhm.
There's a scene in the new book where
In
she's
January 6th? Yeah, there's a January 6th.
there's
You
a
cover
January
all the hot.
6th. She throws a big party to celebrate the election of the first woman president. I did that. In the first, in Count the Ways, she sends her 7-year-old off to school in her little Krista McAuliffe suit to watch the countdown of the Challenger.
Oh, yeah.
That's how we live the big global events in our kitchens, in our living rooms, in our cars, listening to the radio, and the music is coming in, from wherever.
You seem very plugged into like pop culture and like what's happening. You're not one of those literary figures like some people I know who are solitary and live in the woods in New Hampshire. You actually engage the world and are very involved in the world and
Big
bring the
time.
world into your
Big time, I
into.
do. Yeah,
And why is that? Have you always been sort of a pop culture junkie? I mean, I don't know if that's kind of a negative way
I
to say
didn't
it.
even have a name for it. I was just interested in the world. I wanted to
Right.
I was a big time TV watcher. I knew all the shows. I read TV Guide cover to cover. That was me. I came from a very intellectual family, but I was not myself that way. I was
Yeah.
always a music person. If I had my choice of what I'd be good at, I'd be a singer. I'd be even a backup singer in a band. That would be fine. But I think of my writing as kind of my songs. I want to make you feel the way I feel over a really good song, which includes sometimes crying, sometimes
Oh,
being really happy,
sometimes.
sometimes dancing.
Is it a therapy for you writing? Like, is it something you
I
have to
have
do to
very
kind of get?
strong words on this subject. Nobody should, people will say when I published my memoir, The Best of Us, which was about finding and only 4 years later losing my very good second husband, Jem, when I was in my 50s.
I'm sorry.
And when I went on the tour to talk about that book, people would say, "Oh, it must have been so cathartic." Jim had died by this point. It must have been so cathartic writing that. To which I say, you should not have to pay $25 for my catharsis. No, I don't really believe in writing for the purpose of catharsis. That's for the journal, and which I don't keep. But if I did, that would be where I'd put my catharsis. As it happens, I think it's a very healthy endeavor that I sort of am constantly spending time thinking about whether it's my life or other people's lives, what it means and relationships and sort of untangling, big questions that I have wrestled with in my life. But my goal is to keep you reading. I mean, I've had to write for my living. I couldn't afford to just sort of be cathartic or, be stream of consciousness. I want to keep you turning the pages. I want you to be so engaged in my story that you stay up till 3 a.m. because you can't put the book down. That's what I do. And I don't, my own personal struggles go somewhere else.
You said early on in your early days you were writing for your mom, right? She was like your, your audience. Now, when you write, is there somebody that you're writing for?
Oh, absolutely. I think this might.
And does it matter? Is it different for each?
Well,
like, do you have?
Readers are so important to me. Readers are so important, and it's one of the reasons why I love going on a book tour, because I see familiar faces. I've been doing this for a lot of years and I know their stories. I mean, I always meet new people and that's great too. But I know I have 5,000 Facebook friends. I've maxed out on my personal page. And if I went through the list, and I sometimes do, trying to eliminate some so I can make room for others, I know most of them. I can't. I said, no, I know, she had a child who died. Oh, she got diagnosed with MS or whatever. I know their stories. I'm going to walk you around my house and I'll show you. I like to just sort of, these are kind of like.
Your house is so pretty. I love the beams.
I love my house. It might not be everybody's. So these are like readers. They're just.
Are they like so they're, for those listening, these are like figurines?
Yeah,
what are those?
They're from, I don't know, Mexico, Guatemala, yard sales, whatever. These are all the people that I think
funny.
of. And actually, my favorite, I have a wall that I think of as my readers. here's this is kind of nice. This is a painting by my father. And
Oh,
right
it's
on the
beautiful.
other side is,
Everybody's going to have to watch this now.
here's,
On my YouTube
here's
channel, I'll
Hank
give you my,
Williams. Yeah, there's Hank
oh,
Williams.
wow.
Yeah. And here's a painting by me. Yeah, there they are. They're just people. I just want to, I'm very solitary. Oh, here I am when I was 18 on the cover of the New York Times. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. What a great picture.
But
No,
here,
I definitely looked that up. That was cute. Yeah.
and this is a wall of masks. I think I have to go upstairs so you can see them. But I do think of them. I like to sort of picture that. I usually keep
This
them over.
tour is brought to you by Joyce Maynard. This is really cool. We've never done a house. We've never done a literary tour through somebody's.
No, I actually never have.
home.
I never have.
This is fun.
But
This is like
so
Cribs.
there's
right about now.
Haiti.
Cribs. Wow.
This is here's a painting. A reader sent me that. He said that was me and At Home in the World. And
It's so wonderful to have readers
there's
that
the
really
Beatles.
stick with you.
Yeah, so yes, they're all there. All my friends.
So let's talk about your process. So I always like to hear somebody who's written so many books like you and is so successful in the craft. Do you still have days when you're like, this is terrible? Like, what am I doing? Or do you have a confidence now where like,
I am confident, but I also, I take my readers really seriously, and I want to, I really think about them waiting for the next book and being excited for the next book and paying a lot of money for the next book, and I don't want to let them down. So I have 3 times thrown away a manuscript a couple hundred pages in, not because it was badly written. No child of my mother could write badly, but it just wasn't good enough or surprising enough or honest enough. I don't know. If I'm having a day when it doesn't feel like, it's going very well, I probably get up from my desk and go take a swim or clean my house or do something else.
Yeah, I've talked about writer's block. I find just taking a walk sometimes it's just
for me, I cannot. As you might guess by this point in our conversation, I have ADHD. I learned that when I went back to college at the age of 65. I returned to Yale.
I want to talk to you about that. Okay, everybody hear that. You went back to college. Did you go back to Yale?
I did. I reapplied. They wanted my my SAT scores from 1970, and I don't think the scores were actually good enough to get into Yale now, but they let me back in. But I can't sit at a desk all day. I need to move, but that actually is fine because I don't think one should sit. It's a very unnatural act to sit all day long and not very healthy. So I walk, I swim every day, and I am thinking about my characters when I do those things. I'm thinking about my.
And by the way, that's working. That's just because you're not sitting in front of your computer.
That's exactly what I say to my students. Yes.
Right. I've said that too, and I think I have ADHD. I have not been diagnosed. My son definitely has ADHD, and he takes medicine for it. I'm sure many people.
Good for him.
Yes, and many people. And many people in my family, I think, have ADHD. Although we were never diagnosed. I mean, it's not a prerequisite of an artist to have an ADHD, but it's certainly a lot of artists that I know have ADHD.
Well,
do you?
People talk about all the problems of it, and there are, and some of mine are rather serious. I have a very hard time reading, and I'm a very slow reader.
Is that, I thought I'm sorry, I heard you in an interview say that that one of your teachers at Yale pointed out that to tell that story. I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it.
I went back to Yale after my husband died. I needed to be out in the world in some way with people who weren't dying of pancreatic cancer. And so I had never intended to go back to college, but I reapplied and I went to New Haven and got myself I didn't live in a dorm, but I lived right in a tiny little apartment and got myself a bicycle. And the diploma wasn't the point, but learning was, and I missed out on a whole part of life, many aspects of which I was not going to be able to reclaim at age 65. But I loved my fellow students. I loved my classes. And I was taking a French class. I love language. And it was a sort of mid-level French class. And I've always been good at languages, and I loved my class.
And you're very popular in France, by the way.
I am popular in
right
France. And that's one of the reasons why I now, work very hard on speaking better French. But I feel I owe it to my readers to be able to talk to them, and I want to talk to them. So I was taking my first exam in 47 years, and I studied hard, and I'm a good student. And I kind of thought, I was rather proud of myself. I thought I'd done well. And the next day we go back to class, and my teacher is passing back everybody's exam, but not mine. And she calls me up after, and she has a sort of sad look on her face, and she puts the paper in my hand, and it's a D-. I'd never seen a D- on a piece of schoolwork of mine in my life. And she said words that changed my life. She said, have you ever been tested for learning? We don't call them disabilities now, differences. No, I never had. Nobody my age was. But the minute she said that, it was sort of like my life flashed before my eyes. And I thought about all the ways that I was challenged by words on a page. Funny, I'm a writer.
You're a writer.
And
reading, I'm sure it's hard for you to read, right?
It is so hard for me to read. I don't have dyslexia, but I had been faking it for a lot of years. I have so many friends who are writers. I'm given so many books. I read about books. I want to read those books. I try to read those books. I go to a bookstore and I practically cry. There's so much that I wish I could read, but I read so slowly. And I have a particular thing. This is like playing Candyland and being sent back to the molasses swamp over and over again.
Yeah.
I can read until I have to stop. And then when I pick the book up again, I have to start all over again at the beginning. I can't retain it. So I took all this really fancy Yale testing that would have cost me thousands of dollars if I hadn't been a Yale student. It was the one bargain of going back to college. And it was determined that I read in the 17th percentile, not the 17th percentile of Yale students, but 17th percentile of everybody. And every page I have to read many times, and I have a hard time. I read there are writers who I revere, and I read them very carefully, and I think, well, one of whom died this week, Alice Munro.
Yes.
And every now and then there's a writer that I have no trouble reading, and I think, I bet they have ADHD.
Really?
Yes.
They know the secret formula.
I think that one of the reasons why some people are as passionate about my books as they are is I don't write in a babyish way. But there's a kind of clarity that I write for a person like me. And so anyway, I had this testing. It was revealed to me. I kind of let myself off the hook. I forgave myself for all the books that I wasn't able to read. I read a lot of short stories. I read a lot of poetry. I listen to a lot of music and songs.
Do you listen to Audible? Do you do a lot of books on? That's what I've done, because I'm like you. I have a
Audible. I love to record, and I think I'm a really good Audible recorder.
Oh man, I want to hear how to like it.
I won't let anybody else record my books, except one of my books, Labor Day. It has a male narrator, and my younger son, who's an actor, recorded that one very well. But no, only me. I take those recordings really seriously. I love to do them. But I can't. No, it doesn't. Audiobooks don't work for me. The gift of ADHD, and you can think about this for your son, I bet it's true for him, is that when you're engaged in something,
I had a feeling
nothing will stop you. And
you know what? This is why I think I have it, because I'm the same thing.
Hyper focus.
But it's hard to get there, right? It's hard to get in that zone.
Once I'm in the zone, I don't want to leave it. I just love that zone. I wrote my novel, Baby Love, in 10 days. I just didn't want to stop. I was just like, don't go away, world. And it was hard when I had young children, but I figured it out. I didn't want anybody to talk to me. I didn't want to cook. I didn't want to anything. And so I write.
You just want to finish. Yeah. You want to get
to just, and so I wouldn't change. I'm not going to start saying, oh, I'd like to be a different kind of a person. I might lose this thing that I so love. So I do consider it a gift, although it carries a big price. The other day, 2 days ago, just before I came home from New Hampshire, I was in New Hampshire, hosting a gathering of women for Mother's Day, because Mother's Day is kind of an issue for some people, including me. And so I had this little writing retreat.
Why is that it's an issue? Because
I'll get to that.
Okay,
but I'm going to keep on my focus. So I was packing
Yes.
up to leave New Hampshire, and I was racing around my house like triple time. And there was a carpenter there working on fixing something. And he said, Joyce, there's blood pouring out of your foot. And I had I had actually ripped off a toenail, a rather major toenail. My big toenail was gone and blood was spurting out. I hadn't noticed because I was in my zone of packing, cleaning, whatever. So that's not too helpful if all I'm doing is cleaning. But if I'm writing, it's great.
That is wild.
Congratulations.
By the way, thank you. You've learned, I know, great for my son, but honestly for me, just selfishly here, I think I learned something about myself. I mean, I've always suspected I had a version of ADHD, maybe not. But the fact that I also have difficulty, I love books and I love writing but I do find it hard sometimes to penetrate with books. And maybe I know why. And I want your short list of authors that have ADHD that write, aside from you, who write free, like is Larry McMurdy one? Because I do like I can read like Lonesome Dove. Like I can read stories.
I would put him there.
Yeah.
I will tell you, I mean, one that just comes to mind because I just sent him a note because I'm a huge fan of him is Andre Dubus, the third.
Oh, okay.
And the father as well. And the father only wrote short stories, and short stories I love because I can read them, in a sitting. And then sometimes I love a writer, not because I think they have ADHD, but I just love their work. Sometimes, I mean, I can read, oddly enough, I did read Moby Dick. That's a long book. I read that book, but there's a lot of books that I know are great and I just can't read them. And I don't, it's not, but songs are great for me, song lyrics. And I've always thought that I could teach a class in writing through good songwriting. Sometimes very simple. It's no coincidence that Hank Williams hangs on my wall. Today I passed you on the street and my heart fell at my feet. I can't help it if I'm still in love with you. What more do we need to say? I'm not going to criticize anybody for saying this because they just don't know, but every now and then I'll hear some writer say in some talk they're giving, well, you cannot possibly be a writer if you're not, a reader, a serious reader. And maybe I'd say, well, I guess I am a reader in a different way, but I just heard it from somebody, very famous and respected, just kind of like, don't even think about, I'm not interested in reading the writing of anybody who isn't very well read. Well, I'm not very well read. I'm not. And I do think that I'm a serious writer. I do know I'm a serious writer. And maybe it helps that I'm the daughter of people who were very well read. So I heard great English spoken. But I don't even think it's that. I care about language. Language is hugely important to me. Whether it's English or French or Spanish, I care about words and I care about language. I care about the rhythms of sentences. I care about the sounds of words. Those are things that make me a writer, but I'm not well read.
Interesting. But you're a very curious person. And how do your
Which
characters...
definition? Do you mean curious like interested or curious like weird?
No, I mean curious, you're interested in the world, like both. You're interested in things.
I'm probably both.
Yeah, yes. Okay, you're both. You said that, not me. But I want to talk about some of your characters in your new book, because when you came up with this family, the idea for this family, is it the characters first, or do you come up with like story? Like what's your process?
It always starts with character, and characters will lead me to story. When I hear somebody say, oh, I've got this great, great plot, and later I'll figure out what the people are like. Good luck on that one. The believable actions come from the character of the person. The reason why those people in that, courtroom, where Donald Trump is being, tried right now, did what they did is because of who they are. It's because of who they are and, what their values were, what they believe, what they hold sacred or don't hold sacred. So I always begin there, and I knew.
Do you sketch out characters in your brain, like
I don't
on
write down
paper?
anything. I know them. I know these people. And then I think about, what their houses are like and what music they listen to and, whether they're good cooks or not, or whether they like to dance or, just lots of things, and who their parents were. And that will lead me to what they do. I'm not a writer who knows where her story is going to end up. And, at least one writer who I hugely respect, John Irving, says exactly the opposite. He knows the last line before he writes the first. That's not me. The thing that
his stories are so intricate. Yeah.
Gets me out of, and mine are too, but I couldn't tell you in advance. What gets me out of bed at 5 in the morning is I want to see what happens next. I am writing.
So you're what they call a pantser.
Is that the name?
You're not a plotter. Well, there's a plotter and pantser, right? There's people who apparently, this is what I've heard in interviewing other writers. There's people who will, maybe like Irving, who will probably like map out a little bit. I have no idea his process. I love John Irving too, but he probably maps out because his books kind of connect a lot. All the stories kind of connect with each other, but he might plot it out. Like there's an outline. Do you have an outline, or do you just let your characters tell you where the story is?
Absolutely not.
That's very refreshing for me to hear. Thank you.
Outline feels very stiff. Outline is for a term paper, not a novel. So no, I want to. What keeps me writing is finding out. I won't even say what's going to happen, but where the characters are going to go. My novel To Die For, which was written long, long ago, and I think I wrote that in 1990, was very loosely inspired by a murder case that was in the news at the time. Pamela Smart enlisted the aid of her 15-year-old. She was a very pretty young blonde woman with aspirations to be on TV. And she enlisted the aid of her 15-year-old lover to murder her husband. And the day she was arraigned, I knew I'm writing a book, and I wasn't going to go out and be a journalist and interview her. Like, even if I'd gotten to her or the boy, they're going to tell me the truth. No, but I wanted to understand the boy in particular. What makes a 15-year-old boy shoot at point blank a man he never even met, and it's not for money? And I knew that my route to discovering that, and it wasn't a book about Pamela Smart. That was just the inspiration.
That was your inspiration.
And it became a fabulous movie, incidentally. I wanted the Nicole Kidman.
Was that the Nicole Kidman movie?
Nicole Kidman, Joaquin Phoenix, first movie.
My God.
Matt Dillon, great.
It's one of my favorite movies. I was going to ask you if that was, because
that's I wanted to understand, and I knew that if I brought a character to life on the page, he would lead me to understanding it. And he did. Round about page 150, I got it, why that would have happened. Not necessarily the real case, but the story that
That's such an interesting. Do you often pull? Because I know that I heard that you wrote a book about a couple of like influencers.
Yes,
you found a news story about influencers, and one of them.
Yep, one murdered the other. Yep, and again, I did not say it's about those two people. I was interested in the phenomenon of two young people setting out to become famous as influencers. Famous for what? Famous for being famous. And they set out across America, and the young man kills the woman. It's a novella, actually.
So is that how you often find your inspiration for your stories and characters? Is sort of like, obviously you're pulling from your life, but also pulling from news headlines. And
sometimes the new book is not headlines. The new book comes from everything that it's, as I said, it's not a thinly veiled memoir, but it is everything I have to say about marriage and parenthood and divorce and life after divorce and the children of divorce and love and forgiveness. Forgiveness is big in those two books. Forgiveness of a kind that I would not have been able to summon in my 30s or 40s or 50s, even maybe not even in my 60s. It's a book. It's the book I wish I could have read when I was newly out of a marriage that left me very raw and angry and bitter, and in a way that did not serve anybody well. Um, uh, yeah.
Why do you sometimes decide to write it as a memoir and sometimes decide to
It's
write?
not a conscious choice. The story just tells me what it needs to be.
What would be the difference? I mean, fiction. What does it give you a freedom because you can sort of
Well,
do
yes. I
anything?
mean, Labor Day, my novel Labor Day, also a movie, although I'm not as fond of that movie. Great cast, Kate Winslet, Josh Brolin, but less successful movie, I
Yeah.
think. Labor Day was inspired by a correspondence that I had when I was probably, in my late 30s, newly divorced and a hard time in my life, with a man in prison who became a kind of an object of, I was his obsession, and in some ways he was mine. And it ended in a terrifying way when I found out, who he was and what he had done and that he was coming to me. And I flipped it around and wrote a novel that is a love affair about a woman
Wow.
who meets a man who's just escaped from prison, and he holds up in her house over the course of a long, hot Labor Day weekend, and they become lovers. And we don't quite know, is he the murderer that he's said to be? And I don't want to give anything away, but it's actually a very romantic story. That was not my story. I
Yeah.
flipped. One of the joys of writing is you can have things happen in the story that don't
Yeah.
necessarily happen in life. There was no choice. At Home in the World had to be, I wasn't going to write about a different 18-year-old girl and a different world famous writer who was, in his 50s. It was, not going to happen. But this book, I wanted the freedom to explore some aspects of my experience, but also to see them go different ways. And the children I very consciously made not my children. There's one child in the family who suffers a traumatic brain injury when he's 5 years old. And now in the second book, he's in his late 30s and 40s and raising goats on the farm. There's a character who transitions from being the daughter to being the son. Neither of those events took place in my life, but parenthood, I know, struggles with adult children, I know. There's a character in this, one of the three children becomes estranged from her mother in ways that I understand and that I know something about, unfortunately. And how it can be that a very loving parent and a very well-loved child can pull apart.
Yeah.
And I
The
felt,
transgender. Oh, sorry. Go
no,
ahead.
what were you going to say?
Well, I want to linger on the transgender character in your books. I heard, or you mentioned in an interview that that was they actually had to have a sensitivity reader
Yes.
at your
Well,
publishing house.
this is a
Make sure
thing
that
now in publishing. You have to have a sensitivity reader.
explain that to me. I was shocked. I
It's
mean, I think
and
I'd heard
what
about this.
the sensitivity reader, I mean, good that we're, it's so complicated. I've been around long enough that I've seen the world be in a way that needed to change. When I was at Yale, my best friend was a gay man who didn't feel he could say he was gay. Thank God those
Right.
days are over. My roommate went off with her freshman advisor. Thank God that can't happen now, or at least, if it does, somebody's going to get fired. But at the same time, we're so everything's so correct. So yes, when they read Count the Ways, they had to have somebody who read the book, who was a non-binary person, read the book. It's not about that. I didn't want it. It's not a book about a transgender child. It's just, I like to populate my novels with different kinds of people.
Interesting people, right?
That's how life is. But I got back, they came back with the word that the woman was displaying transphobic attitudes in the book, like characters should only behave the way that it's politically correct. Unfortunately, people don't do that. Actually, the mother, in the year 2000, if a woman discovers that her child wants to transition, that's a pretty scary thing. We didn't know much about it. It didn't happen in my life, but I had a friend whose daughter became her son, and at the time, I thought this was a tragedy. Now I know it's not. That's what, stories are about: growth, discovery, change,
It's not honest to not be able to talk
Right.
about it honestly. That's so upsetting to me. That I understand it comes from the right place, this idea of a sensitivity reader, like you want to be careful, but also I don't even know if it comes from exactly the right place, because I think part of it is just a fear of being canceled. We know all about cancellation, right? By a publishing company or an author being canceled for, and that's sort of terrible, for the publishing company, terrible financially, whatever. It's just fear, and it's coming from the left, and I'm a left person. And so it's just,
too.
I see
It actually makes the left look bad. It makes the left look stupid. At Yale, they were, throwing out trigger warnings right and left. You couldn't read Shakespeare. You couldn't read Mark Twain, without, if this is going to upset you, leave the room. You can do that. Books should upset you. Poetry should upset you. They should stir you up and make you, angry,
like
make your heart beat faster. That was the not great part about Yale, seeing that change. Everything soften and get so, careful. I'm not a very careful person. And I don't.
I just wonder, are we old and old fogies? And I don't mean that in a disparaging way, but I feel like, how the older generation always looks
better
back
in
at
our
the younger
day.
generation. Yeah. And I just wonder, but God, it just seems so
better
wrong
in our day. I will freely say some things
Me
need
too.
to change. But in the act of changing, there was some overcorrecting that went on. And that concerns me a lot. The generation in school now has been so protected, but really not protected. They might be protected from a line that mentions a rape in a novel, but are they going to be protected from, the heating up of the planet? Are they going to be protected from the results of the election? Are they going to be protected, from life?
Life is, life. All right. I want to be mindful of your time, because I know you probably have a hard out, or you have to get out.
No, I don't actually. I'm enjoying talking with you, John.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah. Can I ask you one more question?
Sure.
A few more questions. First of all, I guess maybe I'm selfishly asking you this question because I'm a parent. And I feel like your realizations, you're a little further ahead in parenting than I am. My kids are still teenagers.
My children are 40, 42, and 46.
Okay, so with this gift of being able to really look back on mistakes and things that you did right, and obviously this is very much echoed in your book, what is it that you want parents to take away from reading a book like this that might benefit them?
Okay, well, first I'll say...
What mistakes did you make?
First, I will say, I do not believe in giving advice in my novels.
Books.
I tell a story.
Despite what Jonathan Franzen said.
I wanted to tell that story.
Tell that story right now. Okay, that's a really unbelievable story. I wasn't going
to name him, but you just did. Okay. So
I did.
Okay, I'll just tell the story and then I'll go back. I don't believe in giving advice, but I think the way a reader, I respect the intelligence of a reader to figure things out. So, set the stage. I'm at a big literary festival in France, and with my novel Count the Ways, the one that precedes this one. And I'm up on the stage with three male writers, me, one of whom is, Jonathan Franzen. I will add, in the United States of America, would they put me on a stage with Jonathan Franzen? Oh, no, I'm not, serious enough literary person. But in France, I am. In France, I am. So we're all up in the stage and big crowd. And the other guys have a translator next to them. But I do not. I'm rather proud of the fact. My French is not perfect, but I believe that my readers would rather hear me try. And it's good enough. My accent is pretty good, and I think they appreciate my trying. Okay, so I will say, I brag. I had no translator. Okay. So, when you're on one of these things, each person is asked a question and, you're kind of mindful of the time. Some people are mindful of the time. So they ask the first guy a question. He says his answer. They ask the second guy a question, or he says his answer and then it's translated. Second guy, answer, translated. Third guy, got Jonathan Franzen, long answer, long translation. My turn. And I'm very aware of, time. I don't want to say too much, but I want to talk, of course. I love to talk, as you may have noticed. So I'm asked some question about my character, Eleanor, who's also in How the Light Gets In, the new book. And it's something about, I don't know what happened to Eleanor or how, and I say, well, Eleanor learns a lot. She learns forgiveness over the course of this book. In her 30s, she's very angry and bitter over her divorce and angry at her ex-husband. And she basically, as over the course of her blah, 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 blah. But I'm saying it in French. And truthfully, if I'd been speaking English, I wouldn't have said it that much differently, more grammatically, no doubt. And so I say this and I say it in French. So it actually has to be translated for my fellow American writers. It was an American festival.
Right.
At which point, Jonathan Franzen says, the great man says, oh, well, actually, I'm a literary writer. I don't write self-help fiction.
Oh my God.
And he says this in English and then it's translated. And I looked out at the crowd who basically, liked me. And they were sending him looks of daggers. And so,
good.
So I answered my fellow American in French. I turned to him and I said in French, knowing it would be translated, I said, oh, Jonathan, I will disabuse you of this, view of my work. I have read your books, but, perhaps you have not read mine, so you couldn't know this. I do not think of myself as a self-help writer, but I do believe that it is, inherent in fiction that characters grow, change, discover, are in places at the end that they weren't at the beginning. That's called storytelling. That's called life. Anyway, he didn't have anything to say after that. And he never did say anything more to me.
Well, I think it's completely obnoxious.
But actually a great thing happened. I wanted to give him a copy of my book in English, of course. And I ran out to the tent where they were selling books. And there's one bookseller, Shakespeare and Company, that had books in English. And I asked the woman who happened to be the owner of Shakespeare and Company if I could buy a copy of Count the Ways. She said, oh, here, take it. And I raced over to give it to Jonathan Franzen's handler. Never saw him again. I doubt that he ever looked at the book. But she, in the course of meeting her, she said, I told her, oh, I love Shakespeare and Company. It's such a wonderful store. You provided places for young people to stay. I always wished I could be one of those. And she said, oh, would you like to stay at our bookstore? We have a little apartment for writers. And so she gave me an apartment for a month in Paris, thanks to Jonathan Franzen.
So it all kind of worked out. I love Shakespeare.
But to that question, and you asked a very serious parenting question, and I will give you my answer. And I never say this in print. I hope that my stories say it. My character, the character starting with Count the Ways and going 50 years later into How the Light Gets In, is a woman who, like me, is obsessed with protecting her children, keeping them safe. Not so much safe from physical harm. She would let them, do, snowboarding or, whatever, skateboarding, whatever, but emotional harm. And that was me. That part was me. That part was the girl that grew up in an alcoholic family and just, felt the pain of everybody else but herself. And, her toenail could rip off and she wouldn't notice, and wanted to protect her children from pain. And like me, Eleanor does things like, she throws a birthday party for her daughter's seven-year-old birthday, and the shoe of the beloved Barbie is lost at the party. She rips the entire house apart. She goes crazy. And that was me. I did those things. One time, one of my sons got a gift of some really great leather juggling balls, and he was just trying them out in a subway, and one of them dropped in the pit. I jumped in the pit to get it. That was me. That was crazy me. My daughter was, when I was climbing up out of the pit, she was screaming at me, Mom, correctly, how could you do that? could I protect my children from the divorce, the anger after the divorce, the bitterness, the Sunday back and forth with the clothes in the bed? Could I protect them from the world? No. And, look, she's the most vigilant mother, but her son falls in a pond and gets brain damage. Many things happen in life. They will happen. We can no more protect our children than, in the story of the Sleeping Beauty, the king and queen could rid the kingdom of every spinning wheel. And the wiser choice is the one that Eleanor finally comes to, that this is life. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. We cannot protect them. We can just be there we can raise them to be strong enough that when hard things happen, they will survive them.
It's wonderful advice. Certainly resonates with me. I remember once doing an interview with a guy for a story, and his son was a terrible addict of video games and was like a shut-in.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, what do you think, what when you look back, what could you have done differently? He said, I just should have let him fail. I should have sometimes let him fail.
Yes.
Like, if he forgot to bring his cleats to the soccer game, well, not going to play in that soccer game.
Yep.
I'm not going to run back and get the cleats and say,
that is one of the lessons
I know that
for me of being in Guatemala, of living in a Mayan culture. They don't expect everything to go great. They don't expect life to be easy. They expect it to be hard.
All right. Well, this is beautiful. I don't want to end on, because you hate giving advice. So I'm going to maybe frame this last question differently. And that's maybe the best advice you ever received as a writer from somebody else that has really stuck with you throughout. I mean, obviously your mother was a great inspiration to you, but
I could give a little teaser for why people should read At Home in the World, and say that there's a scene in At Home in the World where I'm taking a walk with Jerry Salinger, and he's giving me really good advice about writing. And I wasn't taking notes at the time, of course. I thought I'd be with him forever. I hadn't done the math of that relationship, but he gives really good advice about telling the truth and fearlessly telling the truth. So one would be that. But I think I'll use my mother. And this is a funny little one, but I always say this to, this is not some sort of like big profound thing but it actually is really going to make anybody's work better. My mother used to say, write as if every word cost a nickel. This was the 1950s and 60s. So she said a nickel, and I'll say $5. Write
inflation,
as if every word cost $5, and use them. They're precious, and the attention of your reader is precious. And people want to be writerly and have all these, impressive metaphors or something. And I know how to do those things. I've been around the block, but write as if every word cost $5.
Be economic. That's a wonderful. Okay, let's leave it at that. Joyce, you did not disappoint. You are a wonderful writer and a person to interview. I just had such a pleasure.
I did too.
And I kind of want to go to Guatemala now. So that is not a writing.
Come. Whether you come to one of my things or just go to Guatemala. It's a direct flight from LA.
Oh my goodness. Joyce Maynard. The book is called How the Light Gets In. Highly recommended. Thank you so much.